Today, we're going to break down one of the biggest, most game-changing financial reforms in India's modern history. I'm talking about the Goods and Services Tax, or GST. It was designed to completely rewire how the country does business. So in this explainer, we're going to dig into what it is, how it actually works, and why it matters so much.
Do you remember what it was like to get a bill before 2017? You'd buy something, and at the bottom, there was this whole laundry list of taxes. VAT, service tax, something called a cess. It was just confusing, right? You never really knew what you were paying for. And that little bit of confusion on your bill was actually a symptom of a much bigger problem in India's economy.
So, here's our game plan. First, we're going to jump into that old, messy tax maze to really understand what was so broken about it. Then we'll look at the big idea behind GST, this one tax concept. After that, we'll see how it works in the real world, uncover the secret sauce that makes it all possible, and finally, we'll zoom out and see why this huge change was such a big deal.
You know, to really appreciate why GST was so revolutionary, we have to look at the chaos it replaced. Before 2017, India wasn't really a single economic market. It was more like a patchwork quilt of different state and central taxes. And honestly, it created some massive headaches for absolutely everyone.
The old system really had a few core issues. For starters, you had a ton of different taxes. The central government had its list, and every state government had its own list too. This meant a mountain of paperwork for businesses. It even slowed down trucks at state borders with special entry taxes. But the number one villain in this whole story was something called the cascading effect.
The cascading effect was without a doubt the worst part of the old system. The best way to think about it is like a tax snowball rolling downhill. So a manufacturer pays tax on raw materials. Then a wholesaler buys the finished product and pays tax on the entire price, which already includes the first tax. Then the retailer does the exact same thing. At every single step, tax is being charged on top of tax, making that snowball bigger and bigger.
Let that sink in for a second. It meant the system was just fundamentally unfair, especially to the final consumer. You weren't just paying tax on the value of the product you bought. You were paying a tax on top of all the taxes that had already been paid along the way. It just artificially pushed prices up and made everything way less efficient. Okay, so how do you even begin to fix a system that's so fundamentally broken? Well, you don't just patch it up. You replace it with one single unified idea. And that's exactly where the Goods and Services Tax comes into the picture. It was this massive effort to streamline everything.
And this was the slogan, the powerful motto that drove the entire reform. The goal here wasn't just to make taxes simpler. It was about unifying the country economically. It was about tearing down those invisible tax borders between states to create one true, common national market where business could just flow.
And this table right here, it gives you a sense of just how much clutter was cleared away. On the left, you've got all these central taxes like central excise duty and service tax. On the right, a bunch of state taxes like luxury tax and entry tax. GST basically came in and absorbed all of them into one single comprehensive tax.
But a change this huge doesn't happen overnight, not even close. You can see here the idea was first seriously proposed way back in 2004. It took more than a decade of political negotiations, building consensus, and creating this massive digital infrastructure called the GSTN before it was finally ready to go live on July 1st, 2017.
Okay, so we've covered the why. Now let's get into the how. That slogan, one tax, is a great way to think about it. But in reality, India went with something called a dual model. And it's actually a pretty clever way to make it all work. Let's break it down.
Pretty much everything in the GST system boils down to one simple question. Where is the sale happening? If a transaction happens completely within one state, let's say from a seller in Mumbai to a buyer in Pune, that's called an intrastate supply. But if it happens between two different states, like from Delhi to Bangalore, that's an intrastate supply.
So for any sale that happens inside a single state, the GST that's collected gets split right down the middle. Half of it goes to the central government. That's the CGST, or Central GST. The other half goes to that specific state's government. That's the SGST, or State GST. So it's a dual tax shared by both.
All right, but what about those sales that cross state lines? To keep things simple, one single tax is charged called IGST, or Integrated GST. The central government collects all of it, and then it makes sure the destination state, the state where the goods are going, gets its fair share.
This little mechanism is what makes the whole thing run smoothly across the country.
And now we get to the real magic trick. This is the part of GST that finally solves that tax-on-tax problem we talked about. It's called Input Tax Credit, or ITC for short, and it is the absolute heart and soul of the entire system.
So what is it? Here's the core idea. ITC makes sure the tax is only paid on the value added at each step of the chain. So, when a business buys its raw materials or supplies, it pays GST on them. But then, when it sells its own finished product, it gets to subtract the tax it already paid. It's like getting a credit for the taxes you paid on your inputs.
Let's just follow the chain here, because this is where it all clicks. The manufacturer pays GST on the raw materials. Then the wholesaler buys the final product and pays GST on it. But, and here's the key, they immediately claim back the tax the manufacturer paid as a credit. The retailer then does the exact same thing, claiming back the tax the wholesaler paid. Because of this, the tax snowball never gets a chance to build up, and the only person who pays the final GST is you, the consumer. The government gets its revenue, but without that unfair tax-on-tax problem.
Okay, we've been deep in the technical stuff, so let's zoom out and look at the big picture. We've gone from this super complex, fragmented system to a much more streamlined one. So, what's the real-world impact of all this?
Well, the benefits are pretty huge. First, it finally created that common national market we've been talking about. It completely got rid of that cascading tax effect, which is great for keeping prices more reasonable. A simpler tax system also makes India a much more appealing place for foreign investment and really supports the Make in India idea. And for businesses themselves, it just means less paperwork and a more transparent way of doing things.
And this quote right here really sums it all up perfectly. The biggest achievement of GST was taking that confusing mess of different taxes and merging them, laying the foundation for a truly single, unified Indian economy. So, there's no doubt that GST was a truly massive step towards creating a unified market in India. But with any change this big, the journey is never really over. It solved a whole bunch of old problems, but the question we're left with now is this: what new challenges has this transformation brought with it? And that's the next chapter in this ongoing story.